The maternity ward smelled of antiseptic and soft baby powder. Grace, exhausted but glowing, held her newborn son in her arms. His tiny fingers curled around hers, his chest rising and falling in quick breaths. She looked up at her husband, Marcus, expecting joy to shine in his eyes. But instead, his expression was blank. "It's a boy," Grace whispered, her voice filled with warmth. Marcus turned away, his jaw tight. "I don't want him," he said flatly. Grace froze. "What do you mean?" "I said I don't want him. I never asked for this child. Don't expect me to play father." With that, Marcus walked out of the room, leaving Grace trembling in shock and pain. She looked down at her baby. He was innocent, his eyes blinking up at her as if trying to understand the world he had just entered. Grace kissed his forehead. "Don't listen to him, my darling. You are mine. I will never let you go." And that was the beginning. Ethan's life started not with his father's embrace, but with rejection sharp enough to cut before he even knew words. By the time Ethan was 5, he had already learned to stop expecting anything from Marcus. His father never carried him, never laughed with him, never told him bedtime stories. Grace did everything. She worked, cooked, and held him through nights when he cried. When Ethan once asked, "Mom, why doesn't Daddy like me?" Grace's heart shattered. She forced a smile and whispered, "He's just busy. But I love you enough for both of us." But Ethan noticed. He noticed how Marcus would leave the room whenever he entered, how he never attended school meetings, and how other children spoke proudly of their fathers while he remained silent. Ethan's first day at primary school was filled with noise and excitement. Children clung to their parents, waving as they walked into the bright classrooms. Grace held Ethan's hand tightly, helping him settle into his seat. But when Ethan looked around, he saw fathers kneeling to hug their children, fathers lifting their sons and daughters, fathers taking pictures with pride. "Where's your dad?" a boy asked innocently. Ethan hesitated. He wanted to say, "He's coming," but he knew it wasn't true. "He's busy," he muttered. The boy shrugged and ran off, but Ethan felt a stone lodge in his chest. That evening, he asked his mother why Marcus didn't come. Grace stroked his hair gently and said, "Some fathers don't know how to show love. But you, my boy, will never lack love as long as I'm alive." At home, Ethan learned to live with silence. Marcus treated him like a stranger, sometimes even worse than that. He never asked about schoolwork or joined meals with warmth. When Ethan tried to show him a drawing he had made of their family, Marcus glanced at it briefly and muttered, "That's not me." Grace tried to shield her son, but Ethan could feel the gap. The house always seemed divided, one half filled with his mother's care, the other half covered with his father's coldness. Ethan often wished he could break the wall, but no matter how hard he tried, Marcus would not look at him as a son. When Ethan was 8, the school organized a sports day. Every child had at least one parent cheering them on. Grace came, clapping loudly, shouting his name as he ran the race. But when Ethan crossed the finish line, panting and smiling, he looked toward the crowd, secretly hoping to see Marcus. He wasn't there. Another boy's father patted Ethan's back, saying, "Good run, lad," and it stung more than the pain in his legs. That night, Ethan quietly asked, "Mom, do you think Daddy will ever clap for me?" Grace held him tightly. "One day, Ethan. One day he might see who you are." But deep inside, Ethan wasn't so sure. One evening, Marcus came home angry from work. Ethan, who was 10 by then, greeted him politely. Marcus scowled. "Why are you still here? You've brought nothing but trouble since you were born." The words sank like knives into Ethan's chest. He wanted to ask, "What did I do?" But he couldn't speak. Tears welled up in his eyes, but Marcus didn't notice, or maybe he did and didn't care. Grace rushed in, shielding her son. "Enough, Marcus. He's just a child." But Ethan already knew, his father didn't see him as a child. He saw him as an unwanted shadow. Every wound Ethan received from his father, Grace tried to heal. She became both parents, celebrating his birthdays with a small cake, helping with homework, encouraging him when he doubted himself. She whispered to him, "Your father's rejection does not define you. You will rise, Ethan. You will shine." But Ethan couldn't help longing for something more. He wanted just one word of approval from Marcus, one smile, one moment where he felt seen. At 12, Ethan started to ask harder questions. "Mom, did Dad ever want me? Was I a mistake?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Never say that again," she whispered. "You are not a mistake. You are my blessing." But at night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. If he was truly a blessing, why did his father's eyes always carry disappointment when they fell on him? That unanswered question became the heaviest burden he carried. By the time Ethan reached his teenage years, he stopped trying. He no longer showed Marcus his schoolwork, no longer waited for him to come to events, no longer sought his approval. He built a shell around himself, hiding his pain with silence. Yet, deep down, he still craved what he had never received: acceptance. Every time he saw fathers hugging their sons in the streets, laughter spilling out between them, a dull ache throbbed in his chest. When Ethan was 15, he won a school writing competition. Grace clapped with tears in her eyes, framing the certificate on the wall. That evening, Ethan placed it on the dining table, hoping Marcus would notice. Marcus glanced at it once. "What's this for?" I won first place in writing," Ethan said, his voice soft. Marcus shrugged. "Writing doesn't feed anyone. Better learn something useful." Ethan's heart sank. Even success wasn't enough. After that, Ethan stopped sharing. He kept his achievements to himself, burying the joy he felt so that Marcus's rejection wouldn't crush it. He wrote poems in secret, filling notebooks with words he could never say aloud. Words like, "Why don't you love me?" and "I will prove you wrong one day." Grace sometimes found the notebooks, her eyes misting over. "One day, Ethan," she said softly, "the world will hear your voice." Marcus often compared Ethan with other children. At a family gathering, he praised his brother's son for being strong and smart. Then, in front of everyone, he said, "Look at Ethan, nothing special." The words cut like a blade. Ethan forced a smile to hide his humiliation, but when he got home, he locked himself in his room and wept. Grace knocked softly. "Don't listen to him," she pleaded. "You are more than enough." But Ethan had begun to believe otherwise. At 16, Ethan made a silent vow to himself. "If my father won't love me, then I will make the world see me." He poured his energy into schoolwork and writing, determined to carve his own path. Grace noticed the fire in his eyes and encouraged him. "Turn your pain into power, my son. Don't let rejection destroy you, let it build you." Though Ethan carried wounds no one could see, he also carried resilience. His teachers noticed his brilliance. Friends admired his kindness. Slowly, he realized that he was not invisible, not to everyone. But still at night, the same thought haunted him. Why wasn't I enough for my own father? When Ethan turned 18, he decided to leave for university. The night before his departure, Grace wept, hugging him tightly. Marcus simply muttered, "Do as you like." Ethan waited for more, maybe a blessing, maybe even a farewell, but none came. His father turned away as though nothing was happening. As Ethan packed his bag, he whispered to himself, "I may leave this house unseen, but I will not remain unseen forever." And with that, he walked into the unknown, carrying both his scars and his strength. The university campus was alive with chatter, books tucked under arms, and students rushing across the courtyard. Ethan, carrying his worn-out bag, felt both excitement and fear. It was his first time truly away from home. Grace had hugged him that morning, pressing a small Bible into his hand. "Whenever you feel alone, "Remember, God is with you," she whispered. Ethan looked around and saw groups of students laughing together. He wanted to belong, but a voice inside whispered, "Don't get too close. They'll reject you too." That night, as he unpacked in his small dorm room, he made another silent vow. "I'll make something of myself, even if I have to do it alone." Ethan threw himself into studies, excelling in literature and philosophy. But more than anything, he wrote. His notebooks filled with poems about loneliness, stories about boys seeking love, and essays about pain turning into strength. One lecturer noticed his talent. "Ethan, your words carry fire. Don't hide this gift." For the first time, Ethan felt seen for something beyond his father's shadow. He began contributing to the university magazine, slowly building confidence. In his second year, Ethan met Adrian, a cheerful boy who seemed the complete opposite of him. Adrian was loud, friendly, and always smiling. "You're too serious, Ethan," he often teased. At first, Ethan kept his guard up, but Adrian refused to give up. Over late-night noodles and shared study sessions, they became close. For the first time in years, Ethan laughed freely. Adrian didn't know about Marcus, but he sensed the pain in Ethan's eyes. "Whatever happened before, mate, you're not alone anymore." Ethan also met Lila, a girl with kind eyes who loved reading his poems. She told him, "Your words feel like they've lived 1,000 lives." Slowly, Ethan opened up, and love blossomed between them. But deep down, he feared she would leave. Every time she smiled, he wondered, will she reject me too, just like my father? His insecurities made him doubt himself. Lila loved Ethan deeply, but she noticed his walls. One evening she asked, "Why do you push me away when I try to get close?" Ethan struggled to answer. Finally, he whispered, "Because everyone I ever wanted love from left me empty." She held his hand gently. "I'm not your father, Ethan. I won't leave unless you push me out." Her words comforted him, but the scars ran too deep to vanish overnight. Years passed, and Ethan graduated with honors. Grace came, tears streaming down her face, clapping loudly as he walked across the stage. He looked for Marcus in the crowd, just once more hoping to see him. But as always, Marcus wasn't there. After the ceremony, Ethan hugged his mother. "This is for you," he said softly. Yet inside, a small boy still longed for a father's pride that never came. Life after graduation was not easy. Jobs were scarce, and Ethan often faced rejection letters. Each "We regret to inform you" reminded him of his father's words, "You're nothing special." But Ethan refused to give up. He took small writing jobs, stayed up late working, and believed that one day someone would recognize his worth. After months of struggle, Ethan's short story was accepted by a national magazine. When he saw his name printed on the page, his heart leaped. He ran home to Grace, who hugged him tightly. "I told you the world would hear your voice." But when he told Marcus, the man only grunted, "Stories don't put food on the table." The rejection burned again, but this time, Ethan didn't cry. He told himself, "I don't need his approval anymore." As Ethan's career slowly grew, his relationship with Lila began to strain. His insecurities made him jealous, and his silence made her feel shut out. One evening, she said through tears, "Ethan, I love you, but I can't fight your ghosts forever." She left, and Ethan was shattered. Once again, rejection found him. He sat alone that night, whispering, "Maybe my father was right about me." For weeks, Ethan sank into depression. He skipped meals, avoided friends, and nearly gave up writing. But one day, Grace came to his apartment, holding his old childhood notebook. "Look," she said softly. "Even when you were broken, you wrote. Don't stop now." Her words sparked something inside him. Slowly, he picked up his pen again, determined not to let rejection silence him. Ethan poured his soul into a manuscript about growing up unwanted. The story was raw, filled with pain but also resilience. When he submitted it to a publisher, he didn't expect much. Weeks later, he received the call. His book was accepted. Tears filled his eyes. For the first time, the world would know his story. The book was released, and readers connected with it instantly. Letters poured in from strangers who said, "Your story is my story too." For the first time, Ethan realized his pain had meaning beyond himself. His voice was no longer hidden, it was changing lives. Grace beamed with pride. "You turned your scars into light," she told him. One day, Marcus finally read the book. He slammed it on the table and confronted Ethan. "So you wrote about me, about how I failed you." Ethan stood firm. "I wrote the truth. If it hurts you, imagine how it felt for me living it." For the first time, Ethan wasn't the small boy begging for love. He was a man standing in his truth. Marcus had no reply, only silence. Ethan no longer needed his father's approval. He found strength in his own journey, in the people his story touched, and in his mother's unwavering love. He realized that family is not always blood. It's those who stand by you in your darkest hours. At 30, Ethan stood on a stage, giving a speech at a writers' conference. "I was rejected right from birth," he told the audience. "But rejection is not the end, it can be the beginning. I am proof that your past doesn't define your future." The crowd erupted in applause. Somewhere in the audience, Grace wiped her tears, her heart swelling with pride. Ethan smiled at her, finally free from the weight of his father's rejection. He had built himself from the ashes of pain, and now he was more than enough. As Ethan's life blossomed, he began to meet people who became like family. He mentored young writers, guiding those who felt unseen. He often said, "I know what it's like to feel invisible. But your story matters." Many saw him as a father figure, the very role he himself had been denied. Grace, now older, watched him with pride. "You've become what your father never was," she whispered one evening. Ethan smiled softly, realizing that the cycle of rejection had been broken. He had chosen love over bitterness. One afternoon, Ethan received a call. Marcus had fallen seriously ill. For a moment, Ethan's heart froze. Memories of cold stares, harsh words, and silence rushed back. He could have chosen to ignore it, but something inside whispered, "Go and see him." Grace encouraged him gently. "Son, forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself." After a long pause, Ethan packed his bag and went to see the man who had rejected him from birth. When Ethan entered the hospital room, Marcus looked frail, his once commanding presence reduced to weakness. For the first time, their eyes met without walls between them. Marcus's voice cracked. "Ethan, I don't deserve to ask, but can you forgive me?" Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "All my life, I wanted your love. I wanted you to see me, but you never did." Marcus closed his eyes, shame covering his face. "I was wrong. I let pride blind me. I don't have much time left, son." Ethan took a deep breath. "I forgive you, but not because you asked. I forgive you because I refuse to let your rejection control me anymore." For the first time in their lives, Marcus wept. Ethan held his father's hand, not as the little boy craving love, but as a man strong enough to let go. Grace stood outside the hospital room, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had prayed for years that Ethan would find peace, and now she saw it with her own eyes. Later that evening, she told him, "You have done what many cannot. You have turned pain into strength, and hate into forgiveness." Ethan nodded. "I didn't do it for him, Mom. I did it for us, for me, and for you who never stopped loving me." Months later, Marcus passed away quietly. At the funeral, Ethan stood tall, not as a broken child but as a healed man. He laid a flower on the grave and whispered, "I wanted your love all my life. But I've learned I was always more than enough, even without it. Years later, Ethan became a celebrated author, but more importantly, he became a voice for the rejected. His books touched lives, his speeches gave hope, and his story became a testimony that rejection does not have the final say. Grace lived to see her son shine, her heart full of peace. And Ethan, no longer bound by the wounds of his father, finally found freedom. The boy who had been rejected right from birth had grown into a man who chose love, healing, and forgiveness.